subjectivity versus objectivity for like a minute and then we'll move on. Because I think you were the one who said something about like unscientific, right? Can anybody tell me what kind of like what really is science, or the definition of science, or does anyone know? I can tell you because I remember this from my Dr. Doherty's research, I think it was like research methods in psychology class, my first semester of grad school.
Is science explaining what's known in measurable and repeatable ways?
Yeah, it's measurable, it's repeatable. Yeah.
It's kind of not based on emotions.
Yeah, although you can measure emotions and you can repeat the experiment, right?
Yeah.
So science basically means you apply the scientific method. It's not what you study, it's how you study it. Do engineers apply the scientific method? No. No, they don't. By definition, engineering is not a science because they don't apply the scientific method. Research psychologists are scientists if they apply the scientific method. A quasi-science is some discipline that doesn't fully apply the scientific method, right? Like you partially apply it, but not fully. You don't do like these repeatable controlled experiments, but you can try to kind of keep things as objective as possible. If you disagree with me, take it up with Dr. Doherty. Yeah.
Embarrassing question. The scientific method is?
So the scientific method is hypothesis testing, essentially what it is. So you have a hypothesis, and then you devise some type of experiment that is as objective as possible, measurable, repeatable, and you try and test whether or not the hypothesis is correct. Yeah. And so if you don't do that process, but you're trying to be as objective as possible, you can say it's a quasi-science, sure. But that's not a bad thing, right? People say that like a soft science, like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Why is it a bad thing? I actually have a question about that later that I want to ask you, but do you have an idea about why that's a bad thing?
Soft science, if it's not as repeatable, not as measurable, then it would be less reliable for like making, like relying on it to make money in some sense.
Sure.
So it like makes it's less businessly or less viable for businesses to use.
That is one possible way. I have like this whole feminist theory against why calling something soft is.
I was considering
Yeah.
going there, but I wasn't really sure. Like,
I'm like an uber feminist, if you guys can't tell. But this right here, if you start looking into like decision making, have any of you read anything in like social sciences or psychology about how humans make decisions? What do you remember about that?
We are not rational decision makers. We use biases and heuristics to inform decision making.
Yep, exactly. So we can try and study objectively something that is incredibly subjective, but then we also know that as we're doing this, we're these subjective creatures as well. So I don't totally have a point to make there. That's kind of like the theme of this, right? It's kind of like this weird, how do we do our jobs when, one, we have to spend all of our time justifying why we should be doing our jobs, and or we're trying to be as objective as possible in this like big muddle of subjectivity that is the human experience. But it does also lead me to my actual goal for this talk. And it's this quote, which is attributed to Maya Angelou, according to Goodreads. I didn't actually read a book that said Maya Angelou, and I was like, that one. I was like trying to figure out who this was attributed to, and I trusted that source. But I could be wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong. And if you're correcting me if I'm wrong, you saved me a bunch of minutes or hours earlier for preparing for it. So anyway, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.